I think a lot of entrepreneurs are scared to get into a crowded or established market.
So you came up with something different.
Social media scheduling tools existed, but such a tiny percentage of your followers see anything that you post. You don't have to sell clothes to teenagers to be successful on TikTok. You just have to make a choice.
Hey, Bootstrappers! Welcome to Bootstrap Stories, the podcast where founders, marketers, and thoughtful leaders share the most actionable tips on building a successful business. After meeting with hundreds of bootstrappers in the past years, I figured out that we all struggle to grow our businesses. But the truth is that most of us don't know where to ask for help or advice. That's why I decided to start this podcast, to give you all the keys to succeed at every stage of your business. All the tested strategies for solving your struggles and taking your business to a new level. No fluff, no bullshit, only a real talk between friends that help each other succeed.
Today, my guest for this episode is Roeder, serial entrepreneur and founder at Paperbell. Hey Laura, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. So before we get started, I want to give you an idea of what we're going to discuss in this episode. First, I want to find out about your story at MeetEdgar, a company that you bootstrapped for 7 years before actually selling it. Then I've actually check out, your new project Paperbell. So I want to know a lot about it. And since you are also a social media expert, I want our listeners to be able to come up with all the best practices that you have taught to the world for the last 7 to 8 years. Sounds good?
Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it.
Awesome. So in 2014, you started MeetEdgar, social media scheduling tool. How was it in the early days? How did you get started? Why did you choose this industry? And how did you come up with the idea?
Yeah, so when we launched MeetEdgar in 2014, social media scheduling tools were an established industry. So the two big ones for small business then are still the leaders for small business now, which are Buffer and Hootsuite. They both already existed when we launched. And I just point that out because I think a lot of entrepreneurs are scared to get into a crowded or established market. I mean, I would say you also launched into a very established market. I think actually Edgar and Limlist have some similarities in that we both, I think, kind of put a new spin on an existing solution. And that's exactly, kind of why and how we launched Edgar. So social media scheduling tools existed. But the problem that I was seeing then, which is even more true today, is that such a tiny percentage of your followers see anything that you post on social. I mean, just look at the stats, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of them. You can go in and look at your own stats and you'll see, I used to be able to say that 5% saw it, probably now, 2% or maybe even less. And these are the people that are choosing to follow you, right? These aren't just all the people on Twitter. These are the people that are choosing to follow you, see any given update. So I just thought the way people were looking at social media, and what most people still do, of creating new content multiple times a day, every day, it made no sense to me. Why are you creating unique, original content 5 times a day for 1% of people to see it? So the whole idea of Edgar is that it looks at social media marketing through this different frame of let's create a library of evergreen content that we can keep repurposing on social media. So that was the idea of Edgar. That was its differentiator at launch. And it's still its main differentiator now. Still, Buffer and Hootsuite don't do what Edgar does.
That's really interesting. So you came up with an edge, something different within a crowded market. You knew that they were a market fit because obviously they were already established tools. But did you focus in the early days also on a specific target, or did you start it very niche, or was it more okay, I'm targeting SMBs and that's niche enough for me?
I think we probably could have been more niche, and our audience at launch was, honestly, it was just kind of organically the audience I already had. So I had been teaching small business owners social media marketing via courses. And when I say small business owners, I don't mean 100-person firms. I mean freelancers, solopreneurs, a lot of one-person businesses. That was the market that we launched to at Edgar. I think a few years later, ConvertKit started calling it the creator economy, which was way better positioning and way more clever than what we didn't really have a name for it. Yeah. It was very clever. But really that creator economy type was really the business that we were targeting at Edgar, but we didn't really have a good name for it.
Nice. And so you were mentioning that before Edgar, you were actually like teaching people and small business owner, and let's call them creators, to do like social media. So you leverage your existing audience to purchase your software, but how exactly did you do it? Was it just like you had your list and you just send out an email saying, hey guys, like I'm working on this new exciting project, looking for beta testers, or did you go straight to people like doing cold outreach and having them on board? How exactly did you proceed for the first customers?
So I think I didn't do it so well, which is something I actually corrected with the Paperbell launch. So a mistake I made in the Edgar launch is we thought we were going to be really clever about testing a lot of different things. So instead of just doing kind of a big launch to the whole audience, we would be like, okay, let's do this email sequence to someone who's purchased one course. Let's do this sequence to someone who's purchased a lot of courses, and this sequence for someone who's on our list but hasn't purchased yet. In retrospect, that was just kind of, it was like, okay, but then what, right? Like, because we're not continuing to build that audience. So it didn't really make sense to have a bunch of different sequences because we couldn't really keep using those sequences. And when I look at Edgar's growth was very fast in the first year. We're a bootstrapped company. We reached $1 million annual revenue at like 11 months after launch. So it was wow. Very, very fast for a bootstrapped company. But it's interesting looking at those charts from the first few months, because it's not like everyone joined. It was like, okay, first 20 and then 40, and then 100, 200, 500, So I think, which has its pros and cons. But something that I did differently in Paperbell is I did do just kind of one big launch to my entire audience, to the entire MeetEdgar list, because I saw the mistake I had made in trying to be too clever with I'm going to have this perfect launch strategy with these different segmented audiences.
No, that's really interesting. So it took you 11 months to actually reach like 1 million in AR. That's incredibly fast. And how was the growth after that? Like, did you keep this same hyper growth and trajectory? Like, how did you manage a hyper growth from the start, from structuring the team and also like keeping that momentum to keep growing?
It was difficult because we didn't have that growth. So we had that strong growth for the first, 2.5 years. And then we actually had a drop in growth. And then we had periods where the business was flat for a while. It definitely didn't continue the way it did in the beginning. And we did make mistakes along the way with the team, because I think especially so I had been a business owner for a long time before that. This was my first software company. So that was a new area for me. And I had never had a business as financially successful or as fast growing as Edgar was. So I kind of thought, okay, what do? You hire a team, right? Like I'm kind of looking around at software companies. That's what they do. So the largest our team ever was I guess about 30 people, not enormous, but for me that felt enormous.
Yeah, it's still big. Yeah.
Yeah. In retrospect, we definitely made hires that we did not need, just because I think I was kind of looking around being like, okay, I was looking around at software companies with a few million in annual revenue. And a lot of them did have much bigger teams, So like at one point we had a full-time marketing data analyst on our team. And I look back at that and I'm like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
No shade to him. Like, he was smart. He was a great person. It was nowhere near a full-time need for, like, honestly, it was kind of a one-time. It's like we needed a setup mix panel. It was kind of a one-time project. And then, we could have got a freelancer for a few hours here and there. So I think we made some hires and also way overhired for the customer service team, just thinking, okay, we're going to keep growing fast and we want to maintain this great level of service. A lot of overhiring that we really, in retrospect, didn't need to do.
And do you feel like, because this is something I actually felt like growing Lemlist, is that at some point I was exactly in the same spot as you were, in a sense, like you're making quite a lot of revenue. You're looking at other companies with the same revenue and they're like 10 times your size. So you're like, oh shit, like I need to hire. And did you ever felt like this kind of ego boost that you can get whenever like you have other people asking you how big is your team? Because this is a question that a lot of founders ask to each other, like how big is your team? And when we started hiring more and more people, at some points, I felt like the look in others people, like it was, oh shit, like the team is getting big. So for you as a founder, you feel like you're doing a great thing, even though like it's not always smart. You feel like you need to hire even more people. Is that something you felt also at some point, like the look of other founders on like the number of people in your team were kind of like reassuring you that you needed to hire more, even though if that's not the case?
Absolutely. I think it's because it's kind of a polite way to say, how big is your business, right? People use that as kind of a metric for like, ooh, how much money are you making? Especially then. I think now there's been somewhat of a little bit of a backlash towards that. I think because this overhiring did often happen, especially also, I think at the time, like being a bootstrapped SaaS company, I mean, it's still relatively new, but I think then we were all just kind of looking around being like, oh my God, there's not very many, I think that's kind of the point of this podcast, right? Is there's not very many bootstrap SaaS companies that have gotten to that few million and higher revenue. So we didn't have that many people to model. So we're just kind of looking around and it's like, okay, the other companies at our revenue level are all funded. We know we can't do things exactly like them, but I guess we should do it sort of like them, right? And especially when you're talking to people who are funded, because they're always, way over hiring. That's kind of what funded companies do. So yeah, I think that was a part of it. I mean, I remember, so our team has always been remote, all based in America, but remote. We never had an office. And so we would have meetups once or twice a year. And when we had an in-person meetup at that largest team size, I felt so legit. I felt like, whoa, I have built a real,
it's huge,
a real company. It's huge. Yeah. I've built a real company now. And it does make you feel kind of, I think, validated as a founder.
Yeah, definitely. I had exactly. It's funny that you're saying that because I remember the first time with the team when we crossed, I think around 30 people and we all met for a team building. I was like, holy shit, like this is huge. It's weird to see all the people in the same place. And good question that I have is, okay, you're growing. I'm going back to 2014. So you have this 11 or 12 months where ARR is growing, your growth is huge. You reach 1 million in ARR, which is almost impossible, even for VC-backed companies. And you must have tons of VCs or investors coming at you and saying, hey, Laura, you're building a rocket ship. Let me invest. Did you from the start thought about, okay, I want to bootstrap my company all the way and that's it? Or have you ever thought about raising funds? And if not, why not?
So yeah, I definitely always received those emails. For a while, I would take some of the meetings being like, I guess I should talk to these people. And then, and then you do a few and then you're like, I guess I'm going to stop taking these meetings because that was pointless. I was open to the idea of raising and I did a lot of research about it. And I had a lot of friends who had raised a lot of money. And honestly, all of my friends who had raised all said, don't if you don't have to. Literally 100% consistent advice. They said, don't raise if you don't have to raise. And of course, they also all said, your terms, the farther along you get, the better your terms are going to be. So I just kind of decided to take their advice. And I didn't feel like, okay, this has to be a $80 million business. This has to be a $500 million business. I just didn't really have that goal in mind. And then as the years went on and I would have been able to get better terms, by then it was kind of but now I'm super happy. Now we have this super profitable business that I own all of. Why?
Yeah. Why would you get another people when you can actually get dividends at the end of the year, run something profitable and enjoy? I know that's yeah. I definitely understand this point of view. And when exactly did you kind of stop taking these meetings? Was it after you got fed up of not seeing anything happening? Because just talking about my own experience, like I had a lot of meetings that were really pointless, where people are just like trying to sell you on the idea that you need to fundraise in order to grow like faster. But I had other where people were actually more into like making intros or, you know, like recommending potential hires, etc., etc. And I think like it was great, at least from my experience, like I had some great relationships, and I still have some great relationships where people actually like help me, you know, like grow. And what was for you? Was it just like all the time people were trying to sell you on the idea of fundraising, or did you have any great relationship that you could build?
No, I never met those valuable people.
Okay.
I mean, and also now I know, I didn't know at the time, but now I know that I was just talking to the like college intern lead scraper.
Okay.
You know, I wasn't, I wasn't talking to like the top people at the firm. I was just getting the cold email blast. You know, I didn't know it then. I know it now. Okay. So, I mean, I did over the years form relationships with a few people, I guess, in the VC industry in some way, people that I met through conferences and stuff like that. But yeah, I never got anything valuable from those fundraising cold calls.
Well, fair enough.
Sorry.
And so I want to go back a bit like to your growth strategy, because the first million, it goes like super quickly. And then, you know, like you were mentioning about this slower growth, then plateau, then go back to growth, etc. Like, how exactly do you structure like your growth strategy? What channel have you used that has been working, and how was structured, like kind of your growth department or growth engine?
Yeah, well, so the good and bad is that it was always super organic. You know, if you're looking at Google Analytics, it's like top channel direct, second channel, people searching MeetEdgar, right? So it's like, on the one hand, that is an amazing place to be, but on the other hand, it's something that's very hard to turn that dial on. And also for context, you know, we were always 100% self-serve. So we never had any kind of sales team or even like customer success. You know, it's a low price point self-serve. So we never did any, you know, sales, cold outreach, anything like that. But the strategy has always been around content marketing. So something that I've done a ton of is podcast interviews like this. I've done, I think, over 300 over the years. Yeah. And for a while, I would batch them. We would just schedule tons of them. I would have a week every month where I did a ton of podcast interviews. Podcasts are great for so many reasons. I mean, one, I think they're really overlooked as a link building strategy. Whenever you're on a podcast, you always get a high quality backlink. I think for me, it's much easier than writing a guest post, because you can just show up for that half hour or hour and all the work is done. I don't think you can publish a blog post start to finish in 1 hour. Obviously, the big downside is someone else can write a blog post. No one else can show up as me on the podcast.
True.
So you have to do it yourself. But I think one reason that podcasting is so powerful, you know, or videos or whatever, is that you really, it creates this experience like you've had a conversation with the person. You know, when I listen to someone on a podcast, I think it sort of tricks your brain into being like, yeah, I heard them say that to me. So
yeah, you feel you're in the same room.
You do. Yeah. So I think that kind of relationship building power, that know, like, trust factor is really, really powerful. And the company was definitely always positioned with me as the founder. And I think we struck a really good balance there, because even though people knew me as the founder of the business, it wasn't like, you know, my face was never on the homepage, because of the nature of the product, because it's SaaS, people weren't expecting to like talk to me or hear from me directly. So when I sold the company, that actually wasn't a downside, because I wasn't involved in the day-to-day work. I was known as the founder, you know, but I told the acquirer, I will always be the founder. That will always be true. Like, you can always use my story. You can use my picture on the website saying this is the founder of the business, because that will always
be true.
Yeah. True. Right. So yeah. So the way we grew it was primarily around, you know, content, both like with my story as an entrepreneur, because our audience is entrepreneurs. So that's something they can connect with. And then also doing a lot of content marketing around, you know, the topic of social media marketing.
Nice. And when you sold the business, can you share a bit of the numbers, or is this like confidential?
I can share that it was single-digit millions was the exit.
Okay, nice. And basically, like, why exactly? Like, I know we're gonna make a smooth transition to your new project, which is also like really cool. How exactly, like, did you make that transition of going into another project full time, and at the same time decided to sell a business? Like, how did your kind of like your team react, and how the process was structured?
So when I launched Paperbell, my new business, that was in 2020. And by that point, I was actually very out of Edgar. So maybe like 4 years before that, I had moved to having a head of operations that was really managing the day-to-day. And then from about 2018 onwards, that head of operations became the president of the company. And then I would only talk to her once a week, and I was super out of the day-to-day. So from the team's perspective, there wasn't any kind of like difficulty with the transition.
Okay. And did you like, I'm curious about like this operation thing. So when you hire a head of operation, like, did you give her shares, and how did you find that person?
So no one ever had any kind of equity shares, phantom equity, anything like that. We always just paid good salaries. Okay. And actually something we found over the years is in the beginning, also most of our team did not come from software. Obviously the developers did, but the rest of the team usually hadn't come from software tech companies. And in the beginning, it's something we worried a lot about with the developers, like, are we going to be able to be competitive without equity? We actually found that as the years went on, it was less and less interesting for people because they had stock so many times and seen nothing from it. You know, if you're not the founder of the business, you usually get no kind of outcome from the stock, even if you're supposed to, right? That usually it's like, oh, you think you're going to have an exit. Oh, actually share. Oh, they weren't quite the right type of shares. Sorry about that. You know, that happens a lot. So we found that we didn't really need to give equity for talent. And the person who was in that role was someone who'd been with the business from day one. So she had started out as a project manager and kind of grew through those roles.
Okay, so you hired internally. And is she right now like still the president of the company, or?
No, she's at a different job now, yeah.
Okay. And how exactly like did the process of selling the company went? Did you go through like a website broker? Was it like people reaching out to you and you just saying like, okay, let's do this? Or can you walk us through maybe a bit
Yeah, so I wrote a really detailed blog post about it on Roeder.com. So anyone who wants to hear like the whole story should look at that. So the way that I did it, I didn't use a broker. I did it myself. I did just a ton of research about how to sell a business. So I read all the books. There's actually not that many. So you can just read them all in a few days. It's not that hard. You know, I talked to everyone I knew who had sold a business, who buys businesses, all that stuff. I think the process is, before you've done it, it feels very, very intimidating. It feels like this is so hard. This is so difficult. This is so important. I've never done anything like this before. After doing enough research, I got more and more confident in my ability to do it myself. So what I ended up doing is I didn't use a broker. I just found all of the what's called kind of micro PE firms. So I ended up selling to SureSwift, and they're kind of the example of this type of firm. They buy tons of smaller SaaS businesses, and smaller means like most of their acquisitions are a few million in annual revenue, or I think they do much less. I think they also do ones that I'm not sure how small they get, maybe like a few thousand a month MRR or 20,000 a month. I'm not sure. But I literally just Googled all of the companies out there that buy smaller SaaS companies. Cause I'm like, they buy small SaaS companies. I'm selling a small SaaS company.
Let's meet.
I think they're going to be interested. And a lot of people I found, it's interesting when I tell people about this because they have a hard time wrapping their head around it, or they'll ask me a question like, oh, how long did that take you? I'm like, not that long. Like there's 20 of them. I sent them all the same email. And I've realized it's because it's all about people's mindset around this, which I totally understand because I used to share. People just have this mindset of this must be really difficult. This must be really scary and intimidating and confusing. So hearing, no, you can just cold email them. Or people are like, oh, like you must have had existing relationships. It's like, no, because I have exactly what they want to buy. They're very interested in my cold email, like I'm literally telling them I want to sell what you want to buy. So that's what I did. I just, did cold outreach. Obviously a certain percentage are not going to be interested. A certain percentage are interested. I was very transparent with our numbers very early on. I just wanted it to be like, work with someone who it's like no games, no BS. Like, here's what we have. Is this a good match for what you want to buy?
Yeah, especially I think like for a SaaS business model, especially when you're bootstrap, it's quite straightforward. Like you have your annual recurring revenue, growth rate, churn, and then it's like the EBITDA. Are you spending more or less? You should be profitable. So it's quite easy like to get a multiple, and no one can really, I think, like bullshit you around like, I'm sorry, like this is absolutely not possible. Or, I mean, there are standards in the market. So I think it's definitely a great way. And what was your consideration? Because for example, like we sold one of our SaaS company a few years back. And for us, we went through a website broker just to kind of like smoothen that part of not having to reach out to like PE firms and things like that. What was your reasoning behind not going through like a platform like MicroAcquire or FE, like any broker, like SaaS broker, like FE International or things like that?
Yeah, it was definitely something that I researched. But at the end of the day, I just felt like I knew who the best buyers for us were because it was financial. It wasn't strategic. And I just felt like strategic. I mean, I felt like if there was a great strategic interest pool, I would know about it because like you said, I'm getting constant emails from, VCs and stuff. Like, I'm like, if these strategic companies are interested in acquiring us, like they would have reached out to us already. And I just felt like for my space and my industry, there wasn't really an amazing list to choose from. I also wasn't willing to do any kind of, job at the new company, which is usually what a strategic acquisition is. So then it's like, okay, I'm not doing strategic, I'm doing financial. But then if you're looking at the financial landscape, like, yes, if I put it on MicroAcquire, maybe I would have connected with someone, but like, they're probably not the ideal buyer, right? It's like, I don't want to search fund. Someone who's just like an individual looking for their next SaaS company to buy is not as sophisticated as one of these firms that just buys SaaS businesses. So I'm like, I could have always done that as stage 2. It's like, if none of the micro PE firms want to buy me, I mean, but if none of them want to buy me, that's pretty bad. That would mean that either my number was totally unrealistic or like, I don't know what it would mean, but I just felt like, okay, there's kind of an obvious list of my best buyers. So I'll just start with them myself first.
Nice. No, like, I think it's a smart strategy. One of the other drawback also, like, and I can talk about it, is like, in the end, you have someone who just arrived on your business and get like a percentage of the sales that is as if, they were like a really maybe top performing employee or whatever. So, yeah. And you were mentioning, I want to go back a bit, because we talked a bit about your metrics, the growth, etc. And, like when you're targeting like SMBs or like creators, you have like quite a churn, like a heavy churn. I mean, it's part of the game. I think we've seen also like a buffer, like especially in the recent years where they're really like going down with their ARR, etc., with market being more competitive, us targeting them like really like the SMBs. Was it something that you struggled with, and was it something you figured out a solution kind of to this, or how did you treat it for churn?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no solution to the churn problem when you're in that market, because a lot of the businesses, like, just that line of what is a business is very vague. For Paperbell, our market is coaches, like life coaches. And the top reason that people leave Paperbell is some version of like, I don't really have a business. And it's interesting because in a coach or a creator, their business just being active is really not black and white, right? It's not like a restaurant where they're like, we opened our doors and now we have shut down our restaurant and it doesn't exist. If you're a creator or a coach, it's like, this month I made $1,000. Next month I made 0. Next month I made 50. then I got busy and I stopped doing anything on it for 3 months. And then I came back, right? That's just how those businesses often look in the early days, or sometimes for a long time, because sometimes it's like a side hustle for someone. So that churn is just very inherent. A nice thing about Edgar is it was a very sticky product. I'm saying it still exists and it's still sticky. Yeah. I'm just putting it in past tense, like my involvement, because you build a library and you can't export that library anywhere else. Not because we're trying to be jerks about it. It's just that there's nowhere to put it. It's just like there aren't other tools that you can just like pop your library into. And actually what we would find with Edgar is we had a pretty high rate of people that would come back after they had canceled. And sometimes people, because the problem with Edgar is it did truly like kind of set it and forget it, do your social media for you. So people didn't really need to log in to the tool much. So we found people would kind of be like, what is this thing really doing? I never looked at that. Like, what is it really doing for me? And then they would cancel and they'd be like, oh it was doing all my social media for me. That's what it was doing. Oh, wow. This is actually a lot of work to do myself. And then they would come back. But we never, obviously it would be better if we didn't have that period where they were gone. I would say the most effective thing we tried to do is just, make the tool better, make the onboarding better. I would say the big theme we found for that business was the more decisions we made for people, the better. Like in the beginning, the onboarding was like, do whatever you want. Here's all your options. And in the end, it was like, these are your categories. These are the times you're going to post. Like, this is exactly what you stick in here. People definitely wanted just to be, told what to do, decisions made for them.
I do feel like the more you make people's life easier, like the better. Like people don't like to make too many choices. I think very little, I think it's quite tricky because your early adopters are usually a bit more tech savvy. So for them, they're going to ask you to have so many options, customization, etc. But as you grow and you go more like mass markets, you realize that people don't care about all that. They just want to be told what to do and be sure that they get the result they expect. And how exactly did you come up with Paperbell? Can you walk us through kind of the story of how it all started?
Yeah. So like I said, I had been out of the day-to-day of Edgar. And while I was kind of figuring out my next thing, I did business coaching. And when I set that up, I honestly just assumed that Paperbell already existed. You're like, okay, I need a tool that does this and this, so let me find it. And then you're like, wait, what? There's no, there must be a tool that does that. And the kind of, simplest version of what Paperbell does at the end of the day is just allows you to sell packages with multiple sessions, sell and schedule those packages, which sounds really basic, but there actually aren't good solutions there. Like, obviously there's a lot of scheduling tools like Acuity, Calendly, and they're adding more payment options, but still the payment is like, I schedule one appointment and I make one payment. And then for the next appointment and the next payment, you have to start all over. So I was just like, okay, I just need a way for people to pay me and schedule me, a link.
Simple.
And right. And I was like, oh, this is not a solved problem. That was kind of a surprise to me. So that's where the idea came from, combined with, I think the coaching industry is a just massively growing industry. More and more people are being open to the idea of coaches and in all different forms of their life. For better or worse, it's a totally unregulated industry, which means lots of new people join it every day. It was a problem that I wanted to solve. It was an audience that I already knew. Coaches obviously are kind of part of that creator economy audience. So it's like, okay, I know this audience, they know me, I like this problem, I like this industry, let's do it.
And right now, I think what's interesting is that you definitely really had your target very specific, and you knew exactly what pain points you were solving. Now it's been about 3 years that you started the Paperbell?
Not quite 2 years. Yeah.
2 years. Okay. And did you move from coaches, or are you still really focused on them, or did you kind of move towards creators and people who are selling services online?
No, we're actually getting more specific as we go on. Yeah. So we're actually doing a big customer. We're in the middle of a big customer research project right now. And what we're finding is, if we just focus on people who self-identify as life coaches. That's plenty of market. We're actually now moving more towards focusing even harder on the one-on-one services side, because we do have some functionality for like sharing materials, kind of like very light kind of course functionality. But what we found is that everyone likes to talk about that because it's kind of like exciting to talk about, scale your business through courses and group coaching and stuff. But at the end of the day, 99% of coaches are focused on a one-on-one model, and that's how they make their money, is through one-on-one sessions. So we're focusing there.
No, I think it's really nice. I think a lot of people are, even like we've seen a lot of people talking about, like productivized service where, you just like, but in the end, I think when you're selling service or when you're selling coaching, you're selling your time, and it's not going to change. And that's what people love actually, because they love spending time with you, and you can make more money by increasing your price. Like that's totally fine. But I do feel like, you spot something when you say like people really try to scale things, and in their mind, they think that they can just sell like a huge like to a huge audience. But I know very few people who can actually do that like successfully.
It's really hard. And it's a much more complex. I think also a lot of coaches find there's the fantasy, but then once you actually do it, it's a much more complex business than just selling one-on-one coaching, because you do have all the back end of like setting up all your courses and your funnels and your email list and all this stuff, as opposed to like, no, you just, you buy a package from me. It's $1,000. It's 5 sessions. Like,
you know what you get. No, that's cool. And can you share a bit like your metrics from the start to where you're at right now?
Yeah. So it's gone much slower than Edgar, which is hard when you've had a business that had that like rocket ship right from the first year. So we're at a few 100,000 annual revenue. So, it's enough to be like, okay, this is working. We have like,
you get traction. Yeah.
Yeah. We have, steady growth every month. We see that it's working, but it's interesting once you've done a business that's grown so fast, because you're like, what did I do? What did I do right then, that I'm not doing now? And I think a big difference is, in retrospect, there was definitely a huge amount of kind of right idea, right time, right place when we launched Edgar. Another big difference, which I didn't really get until I went down this road, is Paperbell is a new idea. So, we're saying, hey, are you a coach? Come read our blog, come get some content. Oh, by the way, there's this, you could do this with software. I know you're doing these things manually. What if there was a software that did all of it? It's a much kind of bigger and longer education process, where with Edgar, people were looking for a social media scheduling tool. They're like, I need a social media scheduling tool. This is still how people buy Edgar. Which one do I choose? Okay, I read all the blog posts with a list of the top 10. I'm going to choose one of them. With Paperbell, it's a very different process, where the good part is we do have a very clear, industry vertical and customer profile. If we didn't have that and they weren't looking for it, we would have $0. Like, I just don't know how it would market. It would be a disaster. So now at least we know exactly who to reach. But we're still educating the market on like why this is valuable, why you need this.
I think that's really interesting. And, the fact that you're mentioning that you are kind of like niching down and trying to like get even more specific, I think it's something that a lot of like founders kind of like struggle with, because every time you are more specific about your target, you think that you're going to attract less people. Yeah. And it's actually true. Like it's a good thing, because you might like grow faster actually because you niche down. But how exactly do you like kind of like force yourself into niching down and into going like you just mentioned that you are doing like a big customer survey and interviews, etc. Like, what's your process towards saying like, instead of just being around like just coaching, selling one-on-one services, I'm just going to go at like live coaching in a specific area and go even deeper?
Yeah. So the first part of it, which is the part we've completed, is just looking from the outside in at our best customers. So our best customers, like people have us connected to their Stripe account, so we can see who's earning the most money. So best customers as in like most successful coaches, and also best customers as in the people that, we know because we hear from them, absolutely love Paperbell, are telling everyone about it, have been there a long time, all that stuff. So first we looked at what do their businesses look like? Things like, so in the coaching world, like certifications, or do they have certifications? Which ones do they have? Coaches usually have a lot. They love certifications. They love learning. So, do they have a website? Our tool can be used with a website or without a website. And something interesting we found is that I think at first you would think, oh, of course, the more successful people are going to have a website. But actually, a lot of the people that make the most money, their businesses just run off referrals. They don't need a website, because they're good, they're booked up, So that's been a really interesting finding. So that's kind of phase one, is like, okay, what do they, how do they call themselves? A life coach, a relationship coach? Are they a business consultant? What are they? And then the part that we're going to embark on next is the more kind of jobs to be done style, deep interviews of what we don't have clarity on today is like, what was the main problem that you were looking to solve when you signed up for Paperbell? Is it, we have contract signing, right? There's a lot of different things that we have in the tool. Was it that they were all in the same place? Was it one in particular? Was it that you were paying MBA to do this? And like, that's really appealing to you, that you can just have software do it. So that's phase two of the project.
And have you thought of removing some features from Paperbell?
Hopefully we won't have to remove. Removing is really scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's like saying you're going to niche down.
It's the worst thing to do.
Yeah. They're saying you're going to niche down, and then there's like actually putting your money where your mouth is by removing features. It is very scary to think about removing features. Like I said, we do have some of that like basic, content delivery stuff. I hope that we won't have to remove, because that kind of stuff isn't super robust. So there's still a use case. Like with the content delivery, if you view yourself as a one-on-one coach, it's still very common to deliver like some PDFs or some audio files to your client. Like, oh, here's like a guided meditation you can do. Here's a little workbook that I give all my clients, that type of thing. So I think what we've built so far still stays pretty well in the lane of one-on-one services, but I might have to be brave and do a little cutting. We'll see what the research says.
I think it's like the most scary thing to do, and it's tricky, as you said, because if some of your user will actually find value in things that you can remove, but down the line, I think for your positioning and for really like having one tool that's on like really one specific problem and making it clear like to everyone, it's something that sometimes you really have to do. But again, like I understand, I've been there. It's
have you done it? Have you cut features?
Yeah. We try to do it like on a like regular basis, and to be honest, it's quite tough. Like the worst thing we did, I think back then, was change entirely like our UX and remove some of the feature, and we had like that month, I think like half of our customers. It was still in the early days, but still, when you're like in the early days, we had half of our customers like churning, which was like the worst. And we thought like, oh shit, like we really did like the worst stuff ever. We have to change everything, go back, etc. And then I said, okay, let's wait for like just a couple of months to see. And actually our activation rate, which was for us like how many people send cold email campaign, we triple it, because it was very low. So we triple it, and it was like making something much more decent. And our, again, same like conversion rate from sign up to paid also tripled. So we were like, okay, this is really great. I mean, in that case, it worked well for us. So we were, I think we kept that mindset of saying like, okay, if we see that people don't really use that feature, or we don't have like really something like game changing in people's mind, we're just going to remove it, because it doesn't make sense. Even if you piss off some users, I think in the long run, you want your tool to be like as simple and as straightforward as possible, because when you have like this, I think one value proposition, you make it clear to everyone. It's easier for them to recommend you. It's easier for them to use you as the one thing you're good at. And for you, it's good to focus on this one pain point, or single job to be done, as you mentioned.
Yeah. And something that I've learned doing this the second time around is not to be scared to make changes, because I think obviously the deeper you are in a project, the larger your customer base is, the harder it is to make changes because people are pissed off. They hate it. You always see this whenever a company changes its logo, right? And everyone's like on Twitter, outraged. How could they do that?
This is so ugly. And you're like,
yeah. But I think you see, you look at bigger companies and you think, what the hell are all their engineers doing, right? Like I was thinking about this with Spotify, because Spotify never changes, and that they have I don't know if they have hundreds or thousands of engineers, and you're like, what are they doing all day? But you kind of understand it more once you do have a few thousand customers. And, with Edgar, low price point, the customer base was always in the thousands. Even when we were kind of starting out, it got to 1,000 very quickly because we are a self-serve kind of mass market. And when you have 5,000 customers, it's like moving a button, you're going to get hundreds of emails that they can't find that button anymore. They don't like it. They don't like where you moved it. So now with Paperbell, I'm really trying to make all the changes that we want to make while I know that we still feel relatively free to do so. Because you see, this is what's really hard. You'll see things in Paperbell the other day, I realized some really core functionality. The way the buttons were named was super confusing. I'm like, we need to move all these buttons and we need to rename what they do. And it's nice telling myself, yes, do that, because this will only get worse. We're like, oh, don't want to rename the buttons. It's like, no, these button names are going to keep being confusing 3 years from now. And then we're going to feel like we can't change them because everyone's so used to it. Everyone's going to be so mad at it. So I'm trying to have a better perspective of you have to make those changes, as painful as it is.
No, that's for sure. And I think at some point, you need to be ready as a founder to be able to cope with pissed off people, because at least, it shows that they are using your product, which is great. And then people by definition don't like changes. So it's just go with it if you believe, because in the end, it's your product. So you are the owner, you are the one doing it. And your role is to make the tough calls. And so I know we have a bit around 10 minutes left. So I would love to go back with for our listeners, to social media, because you've spent quite a lot of time towards that. So I would love to go and try to go through how, as a young company and small company, would you go through on managing your social media account? So how much time, how many times would you post? What strategy would you have? How exactly would you go from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's social media has really divided into kind of what I see as two paths, which is kind of a basic maintenance path and takes a lot of work, a lot of activity, but can possibly get you a much bigger audience path. And probably the easiest way to explain it is just saying the strategy we're taking for Paperbell. So for Paperbell, content marketing and SEO in particular is our main strategy for customer acquisition, SEO, optimized content, blog posts. Okay. So what we're doing for social media is very, very basic. We do use MeetEdgar, and it's all of our content is evergreen. So we just load all of our content into MeetEdgar. We have variations with headlines and images and things like that. And our content goes out every day on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. And it's nothing groundbreaking. It's here's the headline, here's the blog post. We're not making it super interesting. We don't get any kind of amazing lead gen from that, but I think it's very well worth doing just from having kind of a full SEO content marketing strategy. You want to be out there on social media, just giving people the opportunity to see it, giving people the opportunity to link back to it or share it or whatever. It's just doing that kind of basics. It's not going to explode your company. At the same time, I think it's just a best practice that keeps kind of the content machine running. And with Edgar, it's really, really easy to do. It really, we just have a checklist that a VA does for loading up all the content into Edgar. So that's kind of path one. That's all we're doing at Paperbell. Path two is now it's all about video. Always in social media, when the new platforms come out, you have a real opportunity to get audience and exposure. Over time, you don't, because marketers ruin everything. It's totally true. So the platform now is TikTok. Like, you can still build significant audience on TikTok. Like, you can be discovered on TikTok. That's much, much harder on all the other platforms. And you have to have like a legit, super high quality video creation strategy. We don't have the resources for that right now. It's just like, it's not what we're doing right now. And as a small company, as a bootstrap company, you really have to, I think, just make a very aware choice. Like, there's no point in just like being like, I'm just gonna have some dumb AI tool generate some video clips based on our blog content and put them on TikTok. Like, no one's gonna see it, you know? So I think you do just have to be very aware of the path that you're choosing. You don't have to do the kind of more intense social media path. Some people, depending on your industry, also it can happen on Twitter. You know, I follow like real estate Twitter, and I see a lot of people there building significant audiences for them. They're looking for like LPs, investors in their real estate deals, and they do that on Twitter. But similar to the TikTok thing, it's like they're putting out very good quality. It's a lot of work. So yeah, at social media, it's like, are you doing maintenance or are you actually putting a lot of work into it?
Okay, so you have basically like these two strategies. The if I want to sum up a bit, it's like the first one is you really want to stay top of mind with potentially like people who are following you or people who are searching for you like online, because it will bring two things. First, you're always top of mind, so whenever they need what you're selling, they will think of you. And second thing, if they are like content creators, etc., it's easy for them to link to your content or share it. And the other path is to say, okay, like you want to invest heavily. In that case, you need to create like good video content, because right now that's kind of like what's working like really, really well. And in that case, you really need to spend enough resources to stand out. And it's kind of like the long-term game.
Yeah. You know, I have a friend in e-com who has literally built her whole company off TikTok. You know, She has like a product. It's an exfoliating product. So she shows like all the dead skin coming out. It's like, oh, it's so gross and fun to watch. And so she has something that can be demonstrated very visually. And she's had videos legitimately go viral. I feel like it sounds a bit cheesy to say, but like it can still happen on TikTok to have videos go viral. And she has built a very, very successful e-com company that way. But she spends a lot of time creating these videos. Obviously, a lot of them are going to be duds and no one's going to see them, to get the few that are that big hit.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, like TikTok is just really crazy. Like I started, I think I wanted to challenge myself on being on TikTok. So I did it for like, it's been, I think 50 days or something. And the thing is, like, some of your videos, they're not going to be watched by anyone, but some can really go viral. And I had like a few like that, you know, crossed like 1 million or something. And it's just huge. And it's, as you said, I think the opportunity is just insane. So what was it like something like, because in 2014, I think like from 2014 to now, there were like different social media starting or being even more like, I would say, used. Was it something like, how do you look at these trends? Like, is it something like you would just, whenever there are new social media, you would just hop on it and try to like grow your audience as fast as possible? Or do you feel like, you know, like, for example, Clubhouse, where everyone wanted to go heavily on Clubhouse, and then recently it's just like, it's dead.
Well, here's what I always tell people. There's no point in being early. Why would you want to be early if you're looking to build audience? You know what I mean? And Clubhouse is such a great example of that. So like, yes, Clubhouse did have a significant audience for a very short amount of time. But if you would have just waited a year, you know, like it didn't take very long for it to fall into nothing. And if you look at Clubhouse versus TikTok, like I love that you're telling us that you've just been doing this for 50 days and you got a video with 1 million views, right? Which just absolutely proves you don't need to be early on TikTok. It's like, I only got that because my account was sitting there since 2008, right? So there's really no like you need to be early in the extremely broad sense of like, obviously TikTok is still considered somewhat early to some people, but a lot, maybe even if you're not on TikTok, like most people have heard of TikTok, where certainly most people hadn't heard of Club. If you weren't a VC, like you probably hadn't heard of Clubhouse.
No, that's true. That's true. And I was wondering, because we mentioned like two different type of like, I would say strategy whenever it comes to social media. But as you're growing your company, and let's say you're in the first case where at first, you know, like you automated pretty much like everything. Once you were writing content, it was auto-published with different headlines, etc., using Edgar, for example. When comes the time, and when do you think it's the right time to invest into hiring like a social media manager and having someone like handling this full time?
A lot of companies never need to. It just depends on the nature of your business. So,
Okay.
And a social media manager might just be a customer service person, because that's another thing that I didn't bring up earlier. Another reason to do just kind of that maintenance level social media is because people, unfortunately, are looking for you on a lot of different channels. You know, people are often looking for your company on Twitter or LinkedIn, want to send you a message there. And if you have a dead profile, it really can make people think like, is your company still in business?
Is it legit? Is it open?
Yeah, exactly. Like if you look up a company's Twitter profile and they haven't posted since 2017, you think, oh, maybe they've gone out of business, which is kind of ridiculous. It's like, no, maybe they just don't post on Twitter, but that's kind of what people think. So for a lot of companies, it's like, just do that base level activity to be active. Maybe it's just some customer service people, you know, to be able to answer questions. Or maybe you do have a business that is a good candidate, which is a lot of different types of businesses. Like actually the person I was talking about who grew her business on TikTok, she was doing a little talk about it. And she's like, I know some of you think that your people are not on TikTok, but they are. And one of the guys in the audience had a QA tool. And he's like, I don't think QA people are on TikTok. And she's like, let's look up the hashtag. There are QA people on TikTok making QA videos on TikTok, you know?
Oh, it's crazy,
it's probably a huge, like there's a few people, right? I'm sure you could easily be the content leader for QA content on
Definitely.
TikTok.
No, but I think there is like every niche. Like you have like one person who's I think teaching Excel like on TikTok. You wouldn't think that and she's making millions of views on her videos. Like yeah.
Yeah. So it like your business, you don't have to like sell clothes to teenagers to be successful on TikTok. But I just like, you don't have to take that strategy. Like obviously a lot of businesses grow fine without social media marketing. Mm-hmm. You just have to make a choice of, is it a channel?
Either you do it or you don't. Yeah. Okay. And we have a lot of like bootstrap entrepreneurs like listening to the podcast, and I'm always curious to hear about at least like one or like the toughest time you've been through, because we all go through like the up and down in the business, and I always feel like whenever we hear other like entrepreneur stories, it kind of like comfort us in the fact that we're not alone. Yeah. So what was for you like the biggest struggle you had, and how did you like overcome it?
Oh man, I was like, you know, so many tough times to choose.
I know.
So what comes to mind is we lost some major functionality on Twitter. So obviously an inherent danger of a tool like social media, of a tool like Edgar in the social media space, is that you can just lose access to one of the social media networks. And before I started, I assumed we would have some sort of relationship with the networks. We never did. This is something that I'm sure would have been better if we had raised VC, although like from Sequoia, like even raising VC, I think you'd have to be at one of the top kind of well-connected SF firms in order to get these relationships. We never had a rep at Facebook, at LinkedIn, at any of that. And we were one of the top social media tools, but for SMB, and they were just not interested. I think maybe the enterprise tools, maybe they have some kind of relationship with, I don't know. They weren't interested in talking to me. So we never had any kind of heads up about functionality changes. Like we would have to monitor, most of the tools had a developer blog, and we would just have their developer blog feed into our Slack, because that was the only way.
This ultimate stress every morning. You look at this and you're like, please God.
Yeah, because sometimes on their dev blog, they'd be like, okay, in 7 days, we're like changing this API. But sometimes they just wouldn't tell us. And Facebook was the worst for this. They had like 10 different partner programs you had to join, but no communication about which one you were supposed to join. Like maybe you'll get this access, maybe you won't. So I don't know, maybe like 3 years into the journey, Twitter decided that it was going to have a new rule. And that rule was you could not ever repeat the exact same tweet, could never be repeated.
Wow.
So, which is like literally what Edgar does, repeat the same tweet. And the most frustrating part is the way they wrote this rule into their terms and conditions was like literally a black and white. So if you write good morning on your Twitter account and then publish good morning 5 years later, that is technically against their terms of service. They don't shut down people's accounts for doing that. You also aren't allowed to send the same message across multiple accounts if you own those multiple accounts. So the problem we found ourselves in was that, like, honestly, our tool followed the intent of this just fine because we weren't spamming. Like, we always had to make sure that spamming didn't happen via Edgar, because that would have just, shut down everything. We would have lost our access to the networks. So you couldn't spam with MeetEdgar. You couldn't just like send out the same message 100 times in a row. I think our intent of like sending the same tweet like 4 months later would have been like, if someone from Twitter had looked at that, I think they would have said, that's fine. But we can't put our customers' accounts in danger. That both puts our customers in danger of having their accounts shut down, and obviously puts us in danger of losing our access to Twitter. So and there were many social media tools over the years that were gray hat and black hat, and they all got shut down. Obviously it's only a matter of time before the networks are going to do that. So like, we have to follow their terms and conditions to the letter. And so we can't repeat the same content on Twitter. And it was way worse. The impact was way worse than I thought it would be, because what I thought would happen, I was like, okay, this sucks, but all the other tools are in the same boat. So it's going to be annoying for our customers, but like, it's not like there's a competitor that they can go to. But what happened was a certain percentage of our customers, which when we launched in 2014, Twitter was much bigger than it is now. Like, now a lot of companies aren't, to me, it's like a lot of software and development companies, a lot of other companies aren't on Twitter. It was not like that back then. You have to remember, this was before Instagram was big for business. I don't know if TikTok existed, but if it did, no one knew about it from a business sense. It was a different landscape. So a lot of people had come to our tool who were like big on Twitter. And a lot of those people were just like, I'm just not going to use a tool anymore after that. Like, this is what I used you for, was to recycle content on Twitter. If you can't do that anymore, I'm just like, I'm out. That was a big part of how I was using Edgar. So we got a much bigger chunk leaving than we thought we would. And the worst part was that we did not anticipate, because of the nature of Edgar, people's library ran out over time. So, when when the announcement was made, you might have 100 tweets in Edgar that could still go out because they hadn't been, used before. So it's like, you think it's like, okay, we're, in March or whatever, we're going to have to shut down the functionality. We're going to see the drop off. Like, we'll know what we're in for. But the drop off just kept going as people's Edgar libraries ran out, people's library would run out, and they'd be like, oh, wait, there's nothing more. Okay, I guess I'll cancel it now. So it just like went on for such a longer time than we expected. And it was like, where is the bottom of people canceling over this? That was a hard time. Hard time.
And how did you like deal with it? Like, were you just thinking, okay, we just have to go through like that tough time and just focus on what's next? Or
we did have some innovation come out of it, which was great. What we decided to do was we created a tool that pulled like pull quotes from your blog posts to use as content to put on social media. And we also introduced content variations where Edgar recognizes, okay, this is, one link, and then it has like 10 different variations on that same link. So Edgar knows not to send out, the same link, right? 10 times in a row. So we did have some functionality like that helped people create content for Twitter, and also, that's useful for the other networks as well. So there was a silver lining, but I wish I could tell you, oh, and when we created those, then, people were so excited about those features that our growth totally took off. Like, that was not what happened.
That's not the end story. Well, I want to be cautious of your time. I know we're a bit over time. So, I mean, you've shared like some amazing stories. I think you're really like an inspiring entrepreneur. And I'm sure like people are gonna love it. I always finish the podcast with like 3 questions. First one is, what's your favorite like book or podcast?
Well, I'll say a SaaS one. My favorite SaaS one is The Art of Product with Derrick, Reimer, and Orenstein. It's just them like chatting about their businesses every week. And kind of like what I said before, I know both of them sort of casually, like over Twitter, but I think they're my best friend because I feel like I'm in their conversation hearing what they talk about every week.
That's cool. Who's your favorite Bootstrap founder and why? It might be those 2 guys.
Okay, you sent me this question ahead of time, so I had time to think about it, and I'm like, I'm gonna name myself as my favorite Bootstrap founder.
That's good. Self-love.
Self-love. But the reason for that is like there's really not a entrepreneur where I look at them and I'm like, I want to copy their journey. There are tons of entrepreneurs I admire, both like friends of mine and famous ones and all that. Like there's tons of people that I admire and learn from. But I think some people have like that one person, you hear it a lot with like Warren Buffett. People are like, I'm going to be the Warren Buffett of this industry. And I love what he's done with his business. And I'm going to copy his model. Like I really try to constantly check in with myself of like, what kind of life, what kind of business do I want? What really works well for me? So that's
I like this mindset.
That's why I am my favorite founder.
No, that's nice. I like the answer. And what is your favorite thing to do, like to regain motivation during tough times?
This is a tough question for me because I feel like you're supposed to have that bigger why, which that I've never found that's never resonated with me. Like I've never found a genuine, like, this is my why that's going to keep pulling me.
I've got my mission for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So I think for me, how I motivate myself is like just in those kind of small chunks of doing the work, just like going back at it and being like, okay, what's that next little step that I can take, feeling that accomplishment of like, okay, these are the most important things on my list to move my business forward. I'm going to do them. Just getting out of the feeling like stressed or feeling bad about the overall picture and focusing back on the work.
No, that's nice. Small wins over time. I think it's the best. Celebrate all the small wins. And where can people like follow you and learn from you? I know you have like your blog. We'll put all the links, but is there any like preferred media like for you?
I love Twitter because I'm an older person. I'm not on the TikTok, so yeah, I'm LKR
not yet.
on Twitter. Not yet.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll put all the link in the description. Laura, it was like awesome having a chat with you, and have an awesome day.
Yeah, thank you.